Hello and welcome to episode 203 of the Chills of Will podcast. It's a pleasure today to be joined by VV Ganeshananthan. She is the author of the novels Brotherless Night, which is a New York Times editor's choice. And I'm going to stop right here and kind of break the fourth wall. Those of you listening, why have you not bought the book yet? Why have you not bought Brotherless Night? I'm going to stop about 8 times throughout the podcast. It is so good. It's one of the most memorable books I've ever read. Buy this book. Also wrote Love Marriage, which was longlisted for the Women's Prize and named one of the best books of the year by the Washington Post. Her work has appeared in Granta, the New York Times, and the Best American Nonrequired Reading, among other publications. A former vice president of the South Asian Journalists Association, she's also served on the board of the Asian American Writers Workshop and is presently a member of the boards of the American Institute for Sri Lankan Studies and the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. The National Endowment for the Arts, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, Yaddo, MacDowell, and the American Academy in Berlin have awarded her fellowships. She served as visiting faculty at the Helen Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan and at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and now teaches in the MFA program at the University of Minnesota, where she is a McKnight Presidential Fellow and Associate Professor of English. She also co-hosts the Fiction Nonfiction podcast on Literary Hub, which is about the intersection of literature and the news. Good evening. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. So excited to talk to you. It's an honor having a fellow podcaster on. It's an honor having somebody who has written, these two just great books. Love Marriage was like what, 2007, 2008?
It was 2008.
Okay. So I got to figure you made some of those like best, like under 30 faces to watch, that kind of thing.
Okay. I don't think so.
Okay. I mean, it's one of those. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a dim memory.
Well, I was just gonna say it's like one of those like, writing these classics, writing these great books, and at such a young age, and then we come out with, of course, Brotherless Night, which we'll get into later. It, I'm just amazed at all the different places you work, how you really seem to really use your writing for good, and working with the prison writing workshop and such. Do you have time to sleep or what?
That's funny. As a younger person, I shouldn't say that. I actually have an insomnia issue, but it has come
Oh
to my
no.
attention recently that I should sleep more.
Yeah.
So I think, like a lot of writers, I'm constantly learning how to manage my time better,
Yeah.
with the help of a lot of others. So, but yeah, I've been lucky to work with a lot of great people who are very organized, and someday I will be too.
I don't know. I mean, a lot of Midwest here. Are you from the Midwest? Are you from the East Coast? I'm not sure where you grew up.
I grew up in Maryland.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a Maryland accent?
There is actually.
There is?
I guess it's a
Okay.
mid-Atlantic accent at this
Okay.
point. Western Maryland, I think, has its own sound,
Oh, excuse me.
but yeah, I don't know. I guess I have a mid-Atlantic accent.
So, like I said, but yeah, a lot of the work has been done in the Midwest, but I'd love to go back to growing up, and I got to think, but maybe I'm wrong. I got to think you were the one at the library all the time, a big reader, but maybe not. I wonder about your relationship with the written word. I also wonder, I mean, did you speak Tamil growing up? Did you speak a different language? Like, how did monolingualism or bilingualism work in your household?
That's a great question. My parents do speak Tamil. I speak Tamil as well, but I'm what most language instructors would call a heritage learner.
Okay.
So um anecdotally, it's my observation that Tamil kids whose parents migrated to non-English speaking countries tend to be better Tamil speakers because they have to
Uh,
translate for their parents, and I didn't do
mm,
that. Either that, or if there's like sort of a critical mass of folks, like there are a lot of people in Toronto and London who are excellent
okay, right.
speakers. So I'm a little more um my knowledge is probably a little patchier than that, and I've
Mhm.
studied formally a little bit, but as a kid, I guess largely what I did was learn the imperative by being told what to do. And so I can always conjugate the
You're on that
imperative
command form,
flawlessly.
yeah.
Yep, yep.
Uh,
Yeah, so my parents did regularly speak Tamil at home, and I can understand, but I'm, yeah, more receptive than expressive.
mm-hmm. Oh, that's an interesting way to put it. More receptive than expressive. Wow. Did I don't remember if it was an interview with you. I don't remember if it was a blur, but I think you were maybe recanting that someone had paid you a big compliment saying that your English read as Tamil, something to that effect. Does that sound
I've
familiar?
been, yeah, I've been pretty pleased that a couple of the reviews of Brotherless Night have noted that it's a very Tamil novel, despite
Okay.
the fact that it's written in English, that the English
Right.
mimics certain qualities of Tamil, certain cadences,
Mhm.
probably grammatical structures
Mhm.
that exist in Tamil. Um,
Is there something about the language that you feel like you could like you could trace in your writing? You know, is it extremely poetic? Is it brief? Is it I don't know. Is there something about the language you think?
that's interesting. I actually think a lot of it is the grammar. I don't know that Tamil people are known for their brevity.
Okay.
Um, that maybe it would be to our benefit if we were. Um, but um, I guess I'm given to declarative sentences, and I often will attach two verbs together in English in a way that actually mimics a specific grammatical structure.
Okay.
Like maybe a good example in English would be like go and get it as opposed to just get it.
Okay.
Um, and Tamil has auxiliary verbs in that way.
Okay.
So that's one example. But then I think I also like there's certain colloquialisms that I have heard people translate into English.
Mm,
And so it's easy to represent them in English and to know what they mean in Tamil. And I think anyone who has heard that kind of speech in both will recognize that if someone says like right at the end of a sentence in English, but the book says that they're speaking in Tamil, it will denote a certain word or a certain
okay.
structure. Like so I'm sort of, yeah, in a sense I don't know how consciously I was doing this, but there was like a with some dialogue, like an aspect of kind of subtitling that was maybe
Okay.
going on.
Yeah. I think I feel like that's where it at, and that's where it's at in so many languages. Just the idioms, right? The idioms are so fun. Like to translate them literally into English, it's like it shows you why you can't translate literally into English. It doesn't quite make sense in English, but it does in in Hindi or Spanish or Japanese or whatever it happens to be. In Spanish, they'll say, for example, like we say in English, what it costs an arm and a leg. In Spanish, it's like it costs an eye from the face.
Oh, that's so good.
Makes as much sense as costs an arm and a leg, right? I mean, but yeah, an eye from the
Yeah.
face. That's more like so visual. Well, sorry, with the million hats that you're wearing, I'm making you into a linguist as well. Sorry, I don't expect you to be an expert on the etymology and the history of Tamil, but I appreciate that. That's interesting to know because yeah, with that thing saying that your book reads like Tamil in English, I thought was interesting. So I had to ask you about that. Who were you reading? What were you reading growing up? Were you science fiction? Were you reading philosophy? I don't know. Who were some of the writers, and what was some of the writing that really pulled you in?
I read a lot across genres. I can't say I read any philosophy, but I read a lot of writing in English from former British Commonwealth countries. So I
Mm.
read a lot of British literature, a lot of Canadian literature,
Mhm.
um, arguably more than a lot of other American kids, maybe because of having Commonwealth
Mhm.
educated parents and also having cousins and friends in Canada and England with whom I would trade and discuss books, or other
Okay.
Sri Lankan origin kids in the United States with whom I would trade and discuss books. Maybe the person I read the most with, the editor of Love Marriage, was actually also a childhood friend of mine.
Mm.
Not just a childhood, but really a lifelong friend of mine.
Cool as that.
And sorry, say that
I
again.
said, how cool is that?
It was really amazing.
Oh my gosh.
I think a lot of people were sort of like, you two are entering into a business relationship and that is dangerous.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like, it's gonna be fine.
Uh,
Um, and and it and yeah, it was great. And now that she is no longer my editor, it's still one of the best friendships I have.
Mhm.
She and I read a lot of Anne of Green. We read a lot of Anne of Green Gables.
Mhm.
But we also just anything either one of us thought was interesting
Yeah.
was passed back and forth. And we would give each other books for birthdays. And
All right.
um, so she was a great person to read with. And probably, I do think like sometimes we're asked about our influences, and our influences are more like, I don't know, they're like more childhood rooted than
Yeah, yeah.
the thing that we read like, last month even. So I think I'm deeply influenced by the 80s in general, and
Mm-hmm.
also by my imagination of the 80s in other places, notably
Mm-hmm.
the setting of this book.
Yeah.
So I was also someone who as a kid like read a lot of or watched a lot of superhero movies and kind of 1980s action films.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about like the British Commonwealth. So, pop quiz. How would you spell the word center?
Ha. As a child, I would have spelled it Center. And also I am a code switcher. And the second I
Ah,
got to a place that would have spelled it RE, I would have swapped. And I wrote all of
ah,
Brotherless Night. I set my settings to British English.
yeah.
And by
Flat. Fine.
and large, yeah. And by and large, I like was able to do it. I mean, the copy editors caught some stuff that I did irregularly, but
Okay.
mostly I was able to stick to it.
Wow. Oh man. Well, so yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, that's shoot the whole ethic of the podcast really so much of the nostalgia of childhood and how much those books are so formative. But like as you got into high school, college, I mean, what put you on the path to being a writer? And I'm sure it wasn't maybe it was a one-time thing, but like any eureka moments where you're just like, I want to do like she does with that that double feeling of like I could never do what she does, but or he does, like were there any works or again writers who really made you say, I want to do this for a living. I want to do this for fun. All fun.
Sure. Um, I think I was very lucky to have parents who encouraged me. And even from the time that I was a pretty little kid, I said that that was what I wanted to do. And
Mm,
they kind of honored that and took it seriously.
mm,
Possibly that was made easier for them by the fact that I at some point decided I also wanted to be a lawyer, and that I took that illusion, which I also bought into pretty far before I realized that meant I would have to go to law school and practice law.
yeah.
Um, but I think they thought there was like a more traditionally lucrative way that I might make a living.
Mm,
But sort of, I would say, like in general, they were extremely encouraging of the idea that I could be a writer. I remember that when I was in elementary school, Gregory Maguire, who would later write Wicked,
oh,
and who then was just kind of a who was writing very good books, but ones that weren't
yeah.
as well known, came to my elementary school, and he might have been the first writer that I met, and I
Whoa.
just loved his work. And I mean, I loved his work before Wicked.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote some stuff that was kind of spec fic, with teen protagonists or child protagonists. I relatively recently went and looked for, like, it was an early book of his where I didn't remember the title, and I think it's
Mm.
out of print, and I loved this book.
Oh.
Um, I read a lot of biography also as a kid, and I did read sci-fi, which you mentioned earlier, sci-fi
Mm-hmm.
and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would say that that visit from Gregory Maguire to our school, I was like, wow,
Yeah.
look, it's an actual writer. That's very cool.
Yes.
And then I did also have a high school teacher who was the advisor to the newspaper and the creative writing advisor and my regular English teacher. So I had her
Mm.
one year, I had her for 4 out of my 7 classes.
Oh, jeez.
And she was also extraordinarily encouraging. And now that she's retired, is a full-time writer herself. Yeah.
Has,
So
have you been able to send some copies of the books to her? And
yeah, I think
oh,
she's been always like enormously supportive. We're still connected on social media.
nice.
And she sometimes writes to me and vice versa. So it's always nice to hear from her, and also nice to see what she publishes herself.
Yeah.
Um, like a collection of short stories called Flight Path that I really enjoyed. I think she's had one book since then.
Mm,
So yeah, she's a writer primarily, I think, of short fiction, and publishes her stuff in journals.
nice. So, I'm gonna walk this tightrope here. Skull and Bones. I know you're Harvard. Is that Skull and Bones Yale, or is Skull and Bones Harvard?
Skull and Bones is Yale.
Dang it. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Erase, rewind, 30 minutes. So I get then again, if you were in any secret clubs, you wouldn't tell me. But were you in any secret clubs at Harvard?
I think I'm like not a secret clubs kind of person.
Okay.
Um, I'm afraid that I probably have some like, I don't know. It's easy for me to romanticize things like that. And that's like a tendency that I like to fight against, because my progressive political leanings would tend in the other direction. So I'm probably the kind of person who would watch the movie Skull and Bones
Nice.
starring Joshua Jackson, but I would not myself join Skull and Bones.
Joshua Jackson from Dawson's Creek.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God.
It's
Wow.
not a good movie.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for saving me the yeah. Well, so what you were saying basically it sounds exactly like someone who actually was in a club would say. So appreciate that. Someone who would deny it. Okay, I got you. So you were cool. All right. Blink twice. No. Uh, so you have this great podcast that you do, fiction, nonfiction, and I mean, am I saying it right? That like the kind of summing it up is like, there's a book for that. If there's when there was a Supreme Court madness with Clarence Thomas getting $1 million and prize, just an example, like there's a book for that, like political, like hot button type of topics. There's a book for that. There's an article for that. Am I correct on that? Kind of how do you, I guess, which informs which? Are you like, we want to do this story, let's see if there's news, or vice versa?
It has worked both ways. Yeah, it's a podcast about the intersection of literature and the news, and it is really the brainchild of my co-host Whitney Terrell, who's also a fabulous novelist and journalist, and who works at the University of Missouri, Kansas City.
Hmm.
Um, and he was also a journalist before he was a novelist, so that's kind of one of the things we had in common. And I don't know, I guess I tend to we come at it both ways. Sometimes it's like there's someone we're really excited to talk to and what would they be great at talking about? And sometimes it's I'm really mad about this thing and how can we get it on the
Yeah,
show?
yeah.
Like the assault on reproductive rights in Texas in particular. I think we had Elizabeth Wetmore come on to talk about that, or we had Jay Wexler on to talk about the Supreme Court. You know all sorts of wonderful reporters and also creative writers have been on the show
Yeah.
to talk about kind of yeah what it's like to write about things that are topical, which I mean in the broadest sense. And it's been cool in part because I, as like a working writer, was first really published and paid as a journalist, and still have a lot of friends who
Mm,
are journalists, and
mm,
it's cool to get to talk to them about writing,
yeah.
which I'm not sure how often they get asked about what they think about writing, and it's really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really enjoyed this. I think it's a recent one with Celeste Ng. Like the basic. I mean, I wish it were a rosier topic. It's basically like the GOP's war on children. Pretty dark, but yeah, just awesome to hear her. She's obviously one of the greats. Um, Whitney, is that his first name? Your
Yeah.
co. So he calls you the pessimist of the two, huh?
I'm not sure that that's totally accurate, but
Okay.
we'll let him get away with it.
um, in your teaching, like, I wonder what's really resonating with your students these days, or in these last couple of years. Like, what are some of the books, or who are some of the writers who really you're just so excited to bring to the students?
Sure. I think a lot of students for the past several years have been excited about Carmen Maria Machado,
Mm,
and the different ways that Carmen plays with form, the humor, but yeah, the ability to twin that with darkness,
mm,
the engagement with tradition and subversion of tradition and myth, playing alongside realism. Yeah, the like deftness and nimbleness with form.
yeah.
They're always excited about that. People love Yoon Lee,
Mm,
as I do, and she's got a
mm,
new book coming out, Wednesday's Child, which I'm really looking forward to. Um, yeah, I mean, her entire body of work always speaks to people. Whenever I teach a story of hers, people respond strongly
nice.
to that. Yeah, I think it's I do feel like because that one of the things I can do as a teacher is to offer people my like first the it's particular fun for me as a teacher to kind of give my students bespoke reading recommendations.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to get out of them, what are you reading? Why did you like it? And then I'm like, how can I hand you 3 books that you will also
Yeah.
like but
Oh, I
wouldn't have
like that. Three
expected?
books, not just one. 3 books.
Oh
Nice.
no, like I want to give them like a
Yeah.
list.
Slow them
I wanted
down.
to be like, yeah, I think it would have been really fun to be a librarian.
Mm-hmm.
For
Mm-hmm.
example. So yeah, I mean, I think those are a few of the people that they have been
Mm-hmm.
really, really excited about, but there's so many more, of course.
Yeah. The Again, I'm forgetting where I read this or saw this, but and I know books are not, they don't come overnight. Even if you're like, oh, I started, last week. Like, you didn't start last week. You've been thinking about it for 20. This idea of 20 years for Brotherless Night.
I did start Brotherless Night more or less in January 2004.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder about some of the seeds for the book, and maybe those are kind of impossible to trace. There've been so many, but just kind of maybe where it started.
Sure. It started with a little bit of research that I found in a book that I had bought in Sri Lanka, and I was on my way back from that trip and was kind of furiously reading and found this mention of a historical incident that I knew I couldn't cram into Love Marriage. There just was no spot where it would go. And the attention I wanted to pay to that incident exceeded what that other book could contain.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ethan Kanan was teaching a novella class at the University of Iowa, and I wanted to get into the class, and I hadn't originally registered for it because I was like, I don't write novellas. I don't know how interested I am in that, but that's actually not the reason to take the class. The reason to take the class is that Ethan is teaching it. And so at least I like came to my senses and was like, I don't care what it is. Ethan's teaching it, and I should try to take it because I haven't studied with him yet. And then the class was full. So I was like, what can I do to get into the class? I can offer to go first.
Like first in workshop.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So essentially that forced me to write a version of the story in the historical incident really, really fast. I've always responded pretty well to deadlines. That's going to sound hilarious to a certain set of people now, but I responded well to short-term deadlines. And
Sure.
so I was able to write a very long short story, like hardly a novella, but enough to kind of merit. Yeah, Ethan let me in the class, and the class discussed that piece and was kind of like, you should keep going with that. Which was, yeah, a really nice piece of encouragement.
Is that mostly in I don't know. I was gonna say if you could quantify, like is 50% of that story still in the book? Is none of it? Is all of it?
Almost all of it.
Yeah. You know, obviously I know you didn't work on it for 20 straight years, you know, all these, you know, stops and starts and in betweens and this, but like the book is, I mean, takes an emotional toll on the reader. I just wonder about the emotional impact. I mean, it's obviously based very heavily on real life events in Sri Lanka, and you know all the flashbacks and just like nostalgia and all that. Like I just wonder about the emotional impact on you. I mean, is that something where you know you type that last word and it was just tears? Like, and again, I'm sure even when you typed the last word, there was 25 different edits. But I don't know. Is it possible to kind of sum up the emotional impact the book had on you?
Gosh, I don't know that I can sum that up. But it's an interesting question. I think it's, and with impeccable timing, an ambulance is driving by.
Right.
I think that, yeah, I mean, it was certainly like the material is very challenging material. And the form of the book is itself set up to both challenge you, but also invite you in. And it was pretty taxing. And so I did take breaks and, you know, purposely think about other things. I did things like teach various humor classes. I was like, this is, you know, there was a period of time where I tried to make it funnier, and then I was like, this does not take, it's not taking. And so I'm going to have to put the humor somewhere else. So I think it was super tiring. And then also I really, really love the characters. So I think they were a set of people that kind of you know, if you were going to look at that material, they were the people you were going to want to look at it with.
Right. Recently, Oprah's had as one of her books the Abraham Verghese, who's an incredible writer. I haven't read the latest one, but 6-part podcast and all that. I know it's a really, really long book, and again, I haven't read it, but all kinds of characters in history, like that's your book. Like your book, like the characters are so. I keep saying the word memorable. Sorry, I'm gonna say it, a million times more. The characters are so memorable. There's so much to unpack about the book. Obviously, I mean, just on a craft level, it's impeccably done. The emotional impact, which for me hits first, is just almost indescribable. It really is just like a saga. Is Sashi Kala the whole name?
Yeah, you're saying it right.
Is Kala like a diminutive's not the word, but is it like a, can't think of the word, like in Japanese, like san?
No, it's like
No,
it's
just
more
a
like
name.
my full first name is Vasugi, and Sugi is a nickname.
Is it? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Sashi is just a common
Short.
nickname for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the prologue starts in 2009, from New York, and just a really interesting part about, terrorists. The word terrorist obviously calls people's attention, and it's, you have lines that are like, again, like I can't sum it up. You to say like, oh, you humanize people, that's like simplifying, and it's not giving you your full glory. It's more than humanizing them. But something as simple as, when I, Sashi, when we would see these people, I knew these people before. When someone would encounter each other, they simply said hello. They're, this idea of they're just normal people, the people we grew up with, without cheapening in any way, right? So so it's a retrospective in so many ways, which, just setting that up at the beginning that we know is looking back, changes the emotional register even. The first scene, Sashi, she scalds herself with some hot water, basically,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we have Kay, and I'll ask you about the name in a minute. Calm as heck. He's a boy about her age. He has he says, hey, do this thing with the eggs where we, take away the pain, take away the heat from it. And it's a great line that means so much more as the book goes on. Quote, I began as Kay's patient, though he ended as mine. I don't know how much you want to say about Kay's name, because, later in the book, is this like a Chekhov thing where, Kay could be any of us, like, leaving a name blank almost? Is it doesn't matter his name? Is it a secrecy thing?
I think a lot of that. So yeah, in the first scene, there's that prologue that you mentioned, and Sashi is from the vantage point of 2009, recalling her teenage years. And then the book starts in 1981, and she's making tea, and she spills this water on herself, and he hears her scream and runs in and starts cracking eggs where she has burned herself. And through this kind of unconventional treatment, like succeeds in making it look like essentially like it's not, like it's never happened, but it's
Right.
also this undoable incident. um so Kay, I guess, like Kay is part of that original piece of historical
Mm-hmm.
research that I started writing about, which was a hunger strike that took place in Sri Lanka in late 1987. um and Kay is only referred to by an initial in the book. And there were various drafts where he had a full name, and then
Mm-hmm.
I took it out, then I put it back in, then I do-si-doed. Anyway, like it was kind
Mm-hmm.
of just every time he had a full name, it became less possible to write the book.
Mm-hmm.
So more than I can say, like, that I had any grand conscious plan of the symbolism of it
Mm-hmm.
being an initial, it simply made it possible for me to continue to write about him, that it was
Yeah.
an initial.
Yeah.
And I think it, what was my subconscious doing there? I think probably like there's a lot of Commonwealth literature where it's like, it's like an epistolary book, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
Dear Ms. T, I
Uh-huh.
saw N today, and as
Yeah.
we strolled down the moor, he
Yes.
seemed just as much of a jerk as he was before, or like, I
Yeah.
don't know, what have you, like
A
all
great
of this
British
kind of.
accent too.
Don't tune in for that, folks. Um, but yeah, I think like there's a way in which it's a kind of nod to a certain
Mm-hmm.
English language writing tradition, maybe
Yeah.
even specifically an English tradition, and then maybe a tradition actually specifically of the epistolary where there is often direct address.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also a nod to like codes of anonymity, like ways that people have been anonymized.
Mm.
Could he be anyone? Actually, you might start out thinking no, and maybe the answer veers more towards yes than you might have expected. But also, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he ends up being he's pretty
Yeah.
specific.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um
Yeah. He is.
but then it's also about kind of, I was also, I think, trying to get at, and people still do this, right? Like I did write a book that has a lot of connections to actual history. And if you've lived through this period, I mean, there's what you can find on Wikipedia, but if you live through this period,
Mm.
there are 1,000 Easter eggs built into this book for you.
Okay.
um and that's pretty intentional.
Mm-hmm.
But also, right, like making him be just an initial is a way of kind of striking back against the idea that the importance of the book is lodged in its likeness to real life.
Mm.
um like I don't actually, I hope that people don't spend a ton of time sitting around
Yeah.
thinking, was Kay real?
Yeah.
Because it's not actually, that's not his importance to the story
Okay.
particularly.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, is it safe to say that Sashi's, it's not like a torrid like love for him. I mean, it's a lot of respect, and she sees him as intense and serious, and maybe most importantly, capable. Like the capable hands, like with the surgery that the quote unquote surgery he did. But I mean, I don't know. Is she in love? Is it like a potential to be? Or do you want to leave that alone
Um,
for plot
no.
conclusions?
Well, I mean, there's spoilery answers there,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
I think that also to answer that in a way that doesn't spoil things, I think Kay is like a physical presence. He's a real presence in her life. He's someone who kind of, I don't know, in the way that like when I was a kid, if I had a crush on someone, every time they showed up, my entire body would be at attention, but also my brain.
Right.
Um, and my brain sort of asking me the question of like, why does that person compel me so much? Sometimes there was no reason.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
also, I don't know, like I was always compelled by people who were smart in ways, and still am compelled by
Mhm.
people who are smart in ways that I'm not smart. Um, and also confused by um like different ethical choices than the ones I would make, including from people that I care about.
Yeah.
And so I think he's a reminder for her of like also all of the ways that life without a war might have been different. Like a life essentially. I mean, I think about this now with I don't actually think we're not post COVID. And I think about like
Oh,
people's entire lives have been altered. Like people, I spent the first 40 years of my life thinking that the end of my life might go a certain way. And like I was sort of promised something by who? I don't know. But and now it's different and it's
mhm.
going to be different. And so like something was stolen, and who's responsible for that? And what does it look like to have the shadow of that follow you around?
I wish you weren't so right on, but you are right on. I mean, yeah, just I mean, who would have even thought truth is stranger than fiction? How has this happened? Like, yeah, and you've seen some incredible collective, community type organizations, and you've seen people show their true colors, and they're just about themselves, and if it's about helping someone else, maybe, if it doesn't put me out, right? But it's
Sorry, I didn't mean to go so
no,
dark
no, no,
there,
no, no,
but
no, no, no. So, the four brothers. So
Naranjan,
Naranjan, excuse me, Dialon,
Dylan.
Seelan, and Aran. Right? I think that's in the order of their ages. And then mother and father. We'll talk about them later. The father, is a kind of a roving salesman of sort, not a salesman, but he travels a lot for business. And the town city, I don't know how big it is Jaffna, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
this is on the north or northeast. I know the northeast is a big was big has a big Tamil population as opposed to, how do you say the other word, Sinhala?
Singala.
Singhala. Yeah.
Um, so